Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another installation of Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break. I think the entry song into this session, Imagine, was quite appropriate, and we could also add the times they are changing. So many of us have watched the elections over the past several weeks and months with great interest, but our guest today, Chris Quinn, has been absolutely mired in what has been happening. A seasoned journalist with experience and skills that have been honed across the Eastern Seaboard, New Jersey, Delaware, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Orlando, and Burlington, Vermont. He has been a part of our Cleveland community at the Plain Dealer for 17 years. He began leading the Metro operation in 2006, and there he oversaw coverage of the Anthony Sowell murders, the Chardon school shooting, the investigation into the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, use of force by the Cleveland Police Department, and a host of elections. In his role as Vice President of Content for Advance Ohio and editor of Cleveland.com, you will see that he frequently reaches out to the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com audiences to take their pulse on everything from issues as well as the format of the platform. Most recently, he asked for comment on should they report election polls, to which readers said, no, stop. He has been known to stimulate and encourage conversation through his roles in journalism and his candid commentary on Sound of Ideas. We look forward to this conversation and his candid observations on changes that will occur in city halls, city councils, and school boards across Northeast Ohio. He's a 2015 alum of Leadership Cleveland, and Chris, a number of your classmates are here today to support you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate the fact that you're having me on the day after the election instead of the day before, because now there are facts that we can analyze and look smart, and the day before you know nothing and you make phony predictions. And that would have been ugly, because I think the biggest margin anybody was predicting in this mayor's race was about 8%, and many people thought it would be closer. I'm not aware of anybody who saw what happened yesterday, a 25-point lead. That's bigger than two of the elections Frank Jackson won. And I think it does signify people want change in a big way. You cannot misinterpret that vote to be anything other than big change. It's taking a risk on a relatively young and inexperienced candidate because the payoff could be so high. Dave Gilbert had pointed out before the election that Kevin Kelly probably had the highest floor of the candidates, but Justin Bibb had the highest ceiling. And I thought that was a great way to articulate what the voters faced. So I want to go through a little bit about why we in our newsroom think it came out this way, having started where it did at the beginning of the year. Justin Bibb had a 2% name recognition throughout the city. And while the voters didn't know him, I think many of us did. He was active in nonprofits, he was on boards, he was a regular presence, but he wasn't known publicly, whereas pretty much every other candidate was. And yet he comes through and wins this big victory. I think there were about 5 or 6 key moments in this campaign that made the difference. I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back here. I think one of the big ones early was a full-throated endorsement that our organization did, our editorial did. We put it on the front page. We wrote it as vigorously as we could because of what we saw in him. And I know it kicked off a big fundraising, but I think it also had people take a look. Bigger still, I think, was when a few days later, Mike White, the former Cleveland mayor, who had not participated publicly in any campaign in 20 years since he left, came out and endorsed Justin Bibb. And the reason that was significant, whereas many endorsements are not, is there are a whole lot of older voters that have fond memories of Mike White. And they're looking at Justin Bibb, 34 years old, wondering, does he have what it takes? And then Mike White comes in and says, hey, remember me? Remember the hope you felt when I was elected? That's me, just in a new generation. And it made it okay for people to say, okay, I'll consider him. And then Mike White didn't just endorse him, he went knocking door to door, using the power of his popularity to really build momentum. It was a big deal for Justin to get that. Another big moment, and I cannot emphasize how big a moment this was. There was a secret money campaign. It wasn't Kevin Kelly's campaign. It was one of those organizations that collects the money anonymously. Everybody who donated will be known in January. That came out originally to torpedo Dennis Kucinich. It was about, we have to teach the community what it was like under Dennis Kucinich, and people donated for that. But at the end, toward the primary, they put out a postcard attacking Justin Bibb, and it used an image of Justin Bibb that the Bibb campaign and many others thought was doctored to make it look gloomy. And many people interpreted this as racist. This inflamed a lot of the East Side. Ministers went to their congregations to talk about it. It was a colossal mistake for people supporting Kevin Kelly to make, because it galvanized quite a few voters. And it also made the Kelly campaign a little bit gun shy, because with the hypersensitivity to race now, they had to be careful about what they said and how they governed themselves. It was one of those that had campaign watchers scratching their heads. Why did they do that? Big moment. Another big factor in this was that Kelly tied himself to defeating issue 24. Bibb had known from the beginning of knocking on doors that the community favored this. He knew this was going to pass big. People are very frustrated. After 7 years of trying, Cleveland has not come up with a way to hold the misbehaving officers accountable. And so this initiative is on the ballot. It's clunky. It's probably not workable legally. It'll have to be changed or massaged. It'll be in the courts. But what Bibb sensed was people were fed up and they were going to take matters into their own hands and have civilians be in charge of discipline. For some reason, Kevin Kelly missed that. As he went door to door, he got the idea that this was something to ride on, and made pretty much the entire time between the primary and the general a debate about issue 24. Well, issue 24 won by 20 points, 19 points. He missed it. And I think as people saw his literature, they're like, yeah, we don't want that. We're not in favor of that. We're in favor of the guy that believes we need to get accountability. Another fairly big moment. Another of the big factors, I think it turns out, is Zach Reed. Zach Reed's longtime city councilman, has run for mayor twice, was in the runoff with Frank Jackson last time around. He didn't win a citywide election, but he's very popular in the corner of the city that he has represented, very popular. And he came out and endorsed Justin Bibb, but he didn't just endorse him. He went knocking on doors using his connection and his relationship with people in that ward to say, this is the guy. Everything that I've been saying about we need to reduce crime, this is the guy. And the margins in those neighborhoods yesterday were huge. Zach Reed's force of personality carried a lot of votes. I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the Bibb administration in something having to do with public safety, because it's been one of Zach Reed's big pushes. And then finally, and this is another head scratcher, on Saturday, Dave Wondolowski, the head of the Building Trades Union, was at a rally with Kevin Kelly on the stage, and he said, we're going to kick the S out of Justin Bibb on election day. Really profane, it's an image of violence. It's just not the kind of message you want to have. And Kevin Kelly didn't rush forward to say, whoa, I appreciate Dave's passion and I'm glad he supports me, but that's not the way we're campaigning. We're not about violent images. He stood silently by. Twitter erupted, text messages erupted, phone lines burned up. The ministers hit the pulpits on Sunday talking about that. And I think that probably helped drive getting out the vote. If anybody had thought about staying home, figuring that Justin Bibb would win, this induced them to go out, because people really don't like that kind of talk. And so it was just an overwhelming margin of victory, something that I think gives a mandate to Justin Bibb to go in and make bold change. Justin Bibb has talked in the past, should we make public transit free in Ohio? He was on the RTA board. He was part of Cleveland Rising, and he pushed this. With how seriously we already subsidize RTA, and him now appointing members to the board, Will he take that kind of bold move? That's what I think voters are thinking of, is big moves, putting Cleveland on the map for being something different. And he can take this margin and think that way. I want to talk too about issue 24 because it is so controversial. It is very clunky. It is going to be in the courts. The whole idea that it gets automatic budget money, that's unprecedented in cities across Ohio. There's a lot that's odd about it. But what happened here is people are frustrated. The original documents about the consent decree from the Justice Department laying out what's wrong with Cleveland police dropped 7 years ago next month. If it's 7 years to fix it, it's not fixed. And we had a report Monday that said it's still got a lot of problems. So this is this heartfelt thing in the community. They're tired of it. They're tired of having officers shoot people or mistreat people and not be accountable. And there was a fascinating divergence of opinion on this from people who live in the city and people who live in the suburbs. And in my position, I hear from a lot of people. And the people in the suburbs are like, what are they thinking in Cleveland? They got a crime problem. The police are all going to quit. What are they doing? And they just didn't have the empathy to understand what it's like living in the Cleveland neighborhoods. They didn't see how strongly people feel about police needing to be under control. So there was a lot of efforts made to kill this. And I think there's already talk of an effort to put it back on the ballot to try and repeal it. But when something wins by 19 points like that, despite the money that was put into killing it, politicians probably should be listening and figuring out a way to make it work, get rid of the clunkiness, maybe amend it, because this was such a key thing in the city, and it did play heavily into the mayor's race. One last thing I want to talk about is the school board races. This was a fascinating year. I've never seen the number of school board campaign signs I saw this year. The idea that a movement was created to inject this kind of partisan divide into school boards, I think it was intended to galvanize the base that had existed before. But what you really saw were residents saying, look, we're divided and we're polarized, but not in our schools. And it wasn't just a Northeast Ohio thing. Seth Richardson, our political writer, looked across the state, and these candidates did not do well in Ohio at all. That some won, no slates appear to have gotten in. They're not taking over any school boards. And it looks like you saw a big turnout of people saying, whoa, 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 we're not going to have that. We want people on school boards who are focused on education. What will be interesting looking ahead is to see whether this movement will now move to the city council races that exist next year. Next year's a big city council set of elections, and will the same kind of folks go there? Will there be issues that they create to create that kind of polarization? But I think for people that are interested in education, and I've been married for 36 years to a special education teacher, it was a big deal not to have that polarity come into the school boards. And I think people that care about education are very heartened by how this came out. So I think we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. I'll stop there. I'm happy to talk about what I think is coming next through City Hall. The battle for City Council President is going to be very interesting and very important, but I'll leave it for questions.
Chris, thank you so much. And actually, let's go there because that was one of the questions that has come in. So we know that there's going to be this contest for City Council President. What do you see as differences between the two, who Blaine and Carrie, who are potentially seeking that role, and where would they take the city?
This is going to be fascinating. I think you'd have to give the early edge to Blaine Griffin, who is universally admired. The chief reason Cleveland did not collapse into violence we saw in other cities following the Tamir Rice shooting and some of the other things is he was the community relations director. He knew everybody in the city and he worked hard to keep the peace. And I think he's built a lot of coalitions because of that. But he's tied himself very closely to Kevin Kelly and kind of the old guard. He was part of the Frank Jackson administration. And you do have changes in city council. Longtime councilman Tony Brancatelli ended up losing to Rebecca Maurer, who came, from behind in the primary to do that. If people like Mike Polensek look at how heavily people in his ward voted for Justin Bibb, and I think it was something like 75 or 80%, he might say, no, I've got to go with Kerry McCormick. I've got to go with the reform guy because that's what my voters want. If Kerry McCormick, who is the downtown councilman, becomes the council president, I think he would work very closely with Justin Bibb on some of these bold ideas, that he would do his best to move those along. Kerry McCormick was part of the group in these recent months that have banded together to oppose what Kevin Kelly was doing with the stimulus money, to say, no, 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 we need to be much more thoughtful about this and deliberate. It's something very unique, something I've never seen, creating their own meeting to work around the council president. So he would be a closer ally of Justin Bibb. Blaine Griffin, who I believe also has designs on being mayor, possibly in 4 years, would probably do a better job of checks and balances against a mayor, which, you know, let's face it, for most of the last 20 years, you haven't had a council that's done that. The council never had a hearing on what the police did and didn't do on the May riot in 2020. Blaine Griffin would. I mean, he believes that the council should ask the questions, should do the watchdog stuff, not in a mean way, not in a way to just cause trouble, but that is why they're there. So it really is going to be interesting to see what we get. If it's Kerry McCormick, you might get bolder ideas happening more quickly. If it's Blaine Griffin, you might get people that are asking tougher questions, which often leads to better policy.
So, and as we look at the agenda that Justin Bibb has set out, it's going to need a lot of collaboration, especially within the administration. Who do you see coming into his cabinet, and what types of leaders should he be looking for?
I'm going to be having we're having a conversation with Justin Bibb later this afternoon. We're going to ask some of these questions. So I'm betting now. My bet is that Justin Bibb will have a kitchen cabinet and then his city hall cabinet. He's got some very smart people from the past 20 years working closely with him. He has Mike White, who knows the city as well as anybody. He has Paul Clark, the former PNC president, who is widely revered for his public spiritedness. Joe Roman, the former head of GCP, is in the Justin Bibb camp. So he's got people in a kitchen cabinet that can help him understand the people that will be coming at him to try and take advantage of the city. As for his cabinet, I believe he's going to attract the kind of people that Jane Campbell and Mike White attracted, younger professionals that have dreams of change, that have hope to make city this brighter place to be. And my bet is he's not going to have a hard time attracting really good talent. If you look at Mike White and Jane Campbell's cabinet from back then, those people are still in leadership positions today. Diane Dowling is in charge of Say Yes. Chris Ronayne is now running for county executive, having led the University Circle for 16 years. This is the chance for people that want to see the future develop to get into an administration. So I think he's going to attract really good talent.
And as we think about the new administration coming in, some of the new council members who have joined, what could we expect to see from City Hall in the next few years?
Well, I think one thing we might actually see is participatory budgeting. This is that idea that you take some segment of your budget, you put it aside, and you use community voting to come up with radical ideas for spending it that help, and then have the people vote on the best ideas. This is something that some of the more progressive candidates in council have felt strongly about. Justin Bibb, I'm pretty sure, would embrace that kind of thinking. So that would be good, because it not only creates a more democratic society, it gets people interested in governing. One of the big problems we've had traditionally in Cleveland is we don't have a lot of people, younger people especially, wanting to be involved. We did see that in this set of council races, but what a great way to get people immersed into the whole idea of good government. So I think you'll see that. I'll be interested to see if the Progressive Field project is not approved before Kevin Kelly leaves council and the new council comes in. I'll be interested to see whether there's a debate on that. There are a lot of people that still think not many Clevelanders get to go to the ballpark. They can't afford it. Is that the best use of city money? Would we be better off building playgrounds that people do use and rec centers? I think there's going to be a push to get that all passed before the next administration comes in. but some of the sitting council members may put the brakes on so the next administration does it. And then the big thing is the stimulus dollars. We still have $511 million extra dumped into the city's lap. And if you take 100 million out for what was lost to the pandemic, that's a lot of money, one-time money to do signature things. And they're not going to get that spent before Frank Jackson and Kevin Kelly leave. The next administration's going to have the say about that, the mayor and the council. And that's going to be a fun discussion because we could do a lot with that that would be dramatic. I mean, you could completely get rid of lead paint in Cleveland. So you'd remove this poison that is damaging children's brains and causing them to lose income for generations, end it in one fell swoop. Imagine how much that would mean to future generations.
So the comment was made, you campaign in poetry and govern in prose. Can our incoming mayor make that transition from poetry?
Look, I don't know. I've said this repeatedly. There's no way I would have been able to govern a city at 34. I don't know many people who could govern a city at 34, but there are not many people who decide when they're in their mid-teens, they're going to be mayor, and everything they do over the next 15, 20 years is aimed at fortifying themselves to do so. He decided when he was in high school, I'm going to be mayor of Cleveland. And so he's been in the nonprofit world, he's been in the business world. Everybody who's a leader in Cleveland knows Justin Bibb. Everybody has dealt with him. If he can build the collaboration with the nonprofits, with the business world, with other government leaders, with the county, for crying out loud, then he could be successful. The trick for him at 34 is to have the self-confidence to know he's doing the right thing after having collected all the perspectives and doing it without being buffeted by public opinion. If he starts to worry about, is he going to get criticized if he's basing his decisions on immediate public opinion, then no, he won't. It's got a big challenge, and it really depends on his character and who he surrounds himself with.
And as we look ahead, what are some of those major obstacles that he and his administration may face as they look to move Cleveland forward?
We have the most serious violent crime issue in the city that we've ever had. I mean, we had a 12-year-old kill a 17-year-old. We had a 13-year-old and kill a 14-year-old just in the past, week, right? The guns are everywhere. Kids in 6th grade are carrying them to and from school. That's got to stop. If the neighborhoods are in that much danger, we're not going to get anywhere. Part of the other campaigns where we need to fill the city with police officers, Justin Bibb does not believe that. That's not what the neighborhoods have asked for. He believes that you can be much more methodical in your deployment and in some strategies. But if that's not brought under control, nothing else matters. And that's why I get back to Zach Reed. Zach Reed invested a lot of time traveling the country to analyze that. And violence is about so much more than the immediate. It's about poverty. It's about mental health. It's about trauma. And if Justin Bibb can actually figure out a way to deal with that, that'll vault him forward.
So a question posed of, do you have any thoughts around whether Kevin Kelly might be interested in being law director or deputy mayor?
I don't know. I mean, this was a pretty ugly campaign, and I'm not sure that the Bibb administration would want to welcome that. I think some people are talking about whether Kelly might run for county executive. Chris Ronane's already in that on the Republican side. Lee Weingart's already in that. They've already started to have some momentum. I'm not sure if Kevin Kelly could get into that, but I'm not sure he's finished running for office.
And looking to the conversation around public safety, what do we think the fate of Chief Williams will be as we move into this new administration?
I don't think he will remain the police chief. I think the one, Justin has ideas about how the police department should run, and it doesn't fit with Calvin Williams. And two, you can't look at issue 24 and not believe that Clevelanders want something different. Calvin Williams is part of the accountability process, and Clevelanders do not believe that process works. So I believe we will see a new police chief.
And how do you feel the transition between the two administrations will play out in the next 2 months, especially with the added factor of the ARPA funds and Kelly's involvement in that?
You know, I know Frank Jackson pretty well. I think he's actually been a very good mayor. And he has shown, I think, throughout his 16 years, how much he cares for the city. I have no doubt that Frank Jackson will do everything possible to make a good transition for Justin Bibb. I wouldn't be surprised if he hasn't talked to him this morning. They're already setting up meetings with the finance director and chief of staff, Sharon Dumas. Frank Jackson would not want to leave the city in chaos. He's a good guy. And that's the most important transition, is for Justin and his team to come in, understand that budget. When they have to submit a budget to council by, what is it, February 1st, right? And then it has to be passed by April 1st or something. So, you know, he's obviously not going to be able to design that budget in 30 days. He needs to rely on what's there. And I feel certain that transition will happen. I think you can look, Jackson will probably try and protect some of his valued staff members with civil service jobs. Every outgoing mayor does this, and it always causes outrage, but it always happens. But my bet is he will provide everything Justin Bibb asks for, including wise counsel. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that could help prepare you to be mayor better than Frank Jackson. He's done it for 16 years through some very troubling times.
Justin spoke quite a bit in his campaign about the need to invest in public health infrastructure. Do you foresee changes in the Cleveland Department of Public Health?
Yeah, I do. I think, I mean, Frank Jackson's already started some of that, but I think there'll be a much more concerted effort to deal with lead, because we're still not dealing with that well. I think that the pandemic pointed out some challenges that the health department has. When it came time to doing the original tracing, they really fell apart, didn't do a good job. So my bet is that he'll look at that as a top priority. And because we have 3 well-respected institutions that I think would want to work with him, if he reaches out to them, and I think they'll embrace him, and I think we'll see some smart moves there.
We did have a question coming in going back to issue 24, and curious if you know where the source of the support and the funds were around the issue 24, the pro issue 24 campaign.
I believe the original idea came from outside, that this was something that people looked at Cleveland, saw the discontent, and brought it to local people to be the grassroots movement. But Subodh Chandra, the well-known attorney, former city law director, former deputy U.S. attorney, wrote the thing. I mean, this is locally produced, and I believe I can't tell you for sure where all the money came from, but as much as the people who are against it wanted it to look like an outside movement, this also had a good bit of grassroots to it. And you don't win by that margin when that much money is spent against it, unless people feel strongly about it.
We have time for one more question. So Chris, as you reflect on the past few months and as you look ahead, what has excited you most about covering this election, and what's to come with a new administration?
I think the most exciting thing about this election is it's the first time that people in boardrooms that have had sway over how Cleveland elections go were thwarted, that the people who live in Cleveland said, we're picking our leader. And it was younger people that have moved into the city are energized in a way I don't think they have been since 1989. That was desperately needed. There's been too much apathy in Cleveland. And if this sparks that and it continues, and we have our next generation of leaders stepping forward, we're in a good place.
Well, Chris, we thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and experiences throughout this election with us today. And we are very excited for all that's to come with our new mayor in Cleveland. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ann.
Thanks, Rachel. Chris, thank you. We know that this has been an incredibly busy morning for you, and we're very grateful for you carving out time to speak with us. And we look forward to learning more in the pages of cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer in the weeks ahead. It's going to be fascinating.